اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد. Peace and blessings upon him, light of mercy.
7th century Arabia was an environment defined by rigid divisions. In this setting, survival required absolute tribal loyalty, and grievances were settled through generations of cyclic blood feuds. Your social standing, your dignity, and your very right to live were dictated by your bloodline. If you belonged to a marginalized group or a weaker clan, the prevailing social order offered you no protection. The Prophet Muhammad introduced a concept that directly challenged this hierarchy. He advocated for universal human equality, stating that no race or tribe holds any inherent dominance over another. He made this explicit in his teachings, declaring that an Arab holds no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab hold superiority over an Arab. A white person has no superiority over a black person, and a black person has no superiority over a white person, except through their own piety. One afternoon in Medina, the Prophet was sitting with his companions when a funeral procession passed by. Seeing the procession, he immediately stood up out of respect. His companions were confused. They pointed out that the deceased was a Jewish man, assuming the respect afforded to a Muslim funeral did not apply to someone outside their faith. The Prophet looked at them and asked a single question: was he not a human soul? Before any political alliances or religious identities were considered, he established that basic human dignity is the prior requirement. This philosophy of equality had to survive the friction of daily life to be effective. It required immediate application in the places where people interacted most frequently. In the marketplace, honesty with strangers and fair trade with non-Muslims became strict religious obligations. Deceptive practices were banned, ensuring that an individual's background could not be used to exploit them during a transaction. This duty of care extended from the market to the home. Islamic law elevated the status of neighbors to such a degree that physical proximity alone created a moral responsibility to protect them, regardless of their faith. We can see this mandate codified in the historical texts. The teachings state that a person who sleeps well-fed while knowing their neighbor is passing the night hungry is actively denying their own belief. These daily habits, sharing food or trading fairly, turned religious principles into a practical social contract. It established the baseline of trust necessary for a diverse society to function. When the early Muslims migrated to Medina, they entered a landscape torn apart by decades of multi-religious and intertribal warfare. To stabilize the region, the Prophet drafted the Constitution of Medina. This written framework integrated the area's Jewish tribes, pagans, and Muslims into one unified civic body. The document guaranteed equal rights of citizenship and explicit religious freedom. If an external threat attacked the city, the Muslim and non-Muslim populations were legally bound to defend one another. He expanded this diplomacy outward. In a formal treaty with the Christians of Najran, he promised protection for their lives, for their property, and their churches, ensuring their religious practices would remain undisturbed. Medina was a civic experiment where religious freedom for minorities was legally protected, moving beyond simple tolerance into codified law. This diplomatic model eventually reached a global scale. A primary example is the Ashtiname, a formal covenant granted to the Christian monks residing at the monastery of St. Catherine at Mount Sinai. The covenant promised that no bishop or monk would be displaced. It forbade the destruction of any Christian building to construct a mosque, making the protection of these sites a permanent responsibility for Muslims. The ultimate test of these principles occurred when the Prophet returned to Mecca. This was the city whose inhabitants had brutally tortured and exiled his followers years earlier. He entered the city with absolute military dominance. Every historical precedent of the time suggested this imbalance of power would end in mass executions and revenge. Instead, the record shows he offered total amnesty to his former oppressors. He announced to the city, "No blame will there be upon you today." By refusing to leverage his military power for revenge, he broke the cycle of tribal vengeance, showing that Islamic justice is rooted in mercy. This blueprint for coexistence was adopted by subsequent leaders, including the second caliph, Umar. When Umar entered Jerusalem, the Christian patriarch invited him to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Umar refused, stepping outside to pray instead. specifically to ensure that future Muslims would not use his action as a reason to claim the church. These early covenants created long-term results, where leaders of different faiths governed and lived side by side for centuries. Contrast that historical reality with the rigid divisions of the modern world. Today, we often see a reliance on prejudice and the rapid dehumanization of those outside our own groups. In this historical tradition, faith served as a civic shield for the vulnerable, providing a guaranteed place of safety and dignity for those without a majority to defend them. The blueprint for shared human dignity has existed for over 1,000 years. The only question is whether we are willing to follow it.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Ali